All right, Corey, we're going to talk about politics and religion without killing each other, right?
Yeah, that part is important. Yeah, not killing. I was reading a story this morning. Uh, Denver Riggleman, a former congressman from Virginia,
Yeah.
and he came from a long line of intel, and he was sharing a story in his book about how his mother saw him on TV one time and just said, "You're lost to me. I can't believe you're working for the other side," and saying all these heartbreaking things. Sometimes we don't necessarily kill each other, but we sever relationships, important family relationships. And it's just, to me, it's just heartbreaking that, number one, folks can go so far down a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
I heard an academic refer to it as an epistemological bubble. Like, the way we know things, we're kind of insulated from any other influences other than our own little sphere. But also that they'd go that far down as to see anybody outside of that bubble as enemies, and to see the world through this, zero sum, warlike mentality, to the extent that you would sever ties with your immediate family. It just, to me, it's heartbreaking, man. So whether we kill each other or not, I think we can actually take it a step further, at least one
Yeah,
or two, right?
most definitely. So, well, maybe let's backtrack on this a little bit to get some further insight. I mean, it seemed like when I was growing up, I mean, there's obviously differences in what people believe in and stuff like that in politics, but it didn't seem as severe as it has been. I mean, can you trace maybe the beginnings of this current division between the two things and this kind of zero sum game?
If I had to pick a date, I would say 1987, when certain rules and laws were loosened so that entertainers like Rush Limbaugh could do a different type of a radio program. And the tone of his content from the very get-go was very oppositional, very adversarial, very this side, that side, and he was so successful at what he did. He ended up spawning an industry, not just on the AM radio dial, but he opened the door and started paving the way for Fox News just a few years after that, the birth of Fox News in the early 90s, which then opened the door for other cable networks and all types of, now we see all different types of media platforms, where I think that's part of it. But I also think what exacerbated and brought to a whole other level is social media, and the way social media works. Their trade, if you will, or their currency, is attention. So they're getting paid by their advertisers and other revenue streams based on how long eyeballs will stay on their platform and click and like and engage and comment. And the algorithms have indicated, I was reading another article this morning about this very thing, that their algorithms have learned, or originally programmers, now partly through AI, have learned what types of posts, whether it's keywords or pictures or patterns, what types of posts get more engagement, what types of posts an individual consumer of that content will respond to. And not so coincidentally, it's exactly the same things that get us hooked on drugs. It's there's literally in our brain chemistry. You call it a dopamine hit or what have
Mm-hmm.
you. Some folks will go and shoot up in order to satisfy this urge that they have for literally chemically the same reasons that they're going to hit like, or they're going to reply to a tweet, or they're going to engage with someone they see as an adversary in a negative sort of war, with that warlike mentality. So I think it's a combination of things. It's taken years and years, but I also think I don't want to just end with that comment there. What I'd like to say is I see a lot of hopeful signs that folks are recognizing this. You, with your background in medicine and having this really great full circle understanding of health, overall health, I
Mm-hmm.
think you'd appreciate that part of solving the problem is understanding the problem.
Yeah.
Part of the way to healing is diagnosing properly and fully. And I see a lot of different entities, whether it's government entities, media entities, independent individuals, that are recognizing this problem and diagnosing it, and collectively we have a lot of information on how this happened, why this happened, how individuals can recognize it in themselves and their immediate circles, and what we can do about it. So maybe we could talk about that, but I don't want to think that it's all bad and we're going to hell in a handbasket. I do think that there's hope, you know?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of creation of tools and things that happen without understanding the consequences of
Yeah.
those creations. And I feel like we're starting to understand, okay, we're getting enough data that's saying this may be not that great for us. Now, what do we do about this? But we're also, and this is social media, but also we're getting a lot of data in different areas, like in politics, whether it's religion, these two things we talk about. It's like, hey, we might need to we might need to deconstruct this and understand, why is there so much distrust in these institutions at this point? It continues to grow. We're seeing the information. It seems like there's this interesting awakening happening.
I think so.
You know?
I mean, I don't know when this will be released, but we're recording this the day after Tucker Carlson, the highest rated cable news
Yes.
commentator, was fired. And I think a lot of us are going to look at that the way we look at a Rorschach test. We're going to see what we want or what we're already inclined to see.
Yeah.
But there is something there. There is something there in the filings that were released, even though they settled that Fox News settled that lawsuit with Dominion.
Yeah.
There are other cases in the works. We've seen other we see other information that's leaked out, not just about Tucker Carlson, but about Hannity, about other networks, about other public figures. And it's hard to contain that. Even if one is in that epistemological bubble, it's hard to perpetuate that sealed off of an illusion.
Yes.
At the end of the day, I mean, at the end of the day, human beings are still sentient. You know, we're not completely closed off to reality. It's kind of like the illustration I often use is, listen, man, follow the information where it leads, follow the truth where it leads. But if we're going to argue about the existence of gravity, like you're either going to come to a conclusion about that the hard way or the easy way. I prefer we talk about it, and that you could be compelled by, you know, written evidence as opposed to hard evidence that gravity actually exists. You know?
Yeah. And then I think what's also pretty interesting with this is that all of this compelling kind of information that gets leaked out, or, you know, through legalities, and they're like, oh, a lot of the people spewing things that are just crazy actually don't believe what they're saying.
Yeah.
But the public believes it. And so you're getting swindled. And I think the public's realizing, like, well, maybe these people actually don't even care about this thing they're telling you. Oh, but they want ratings. Like, when are we going to wake up? They want the ratings. They're going to give you what they think you want, you know.
Yeah, truth is dispensable. Is
dispensable? Yes.
And you can get rid of it. It's more like something that sounds truthy, you know, is a commodity. You know, you can sell that, but it's neither here. There are some individuals that truth is neither here nor there. Yeah. For some folks, I'd like to think like me. Truth is a value. Truth is a virtue, and the pursuit of truth is transcendent. You know, but for others, it's just a commodity. Something that sounds like truth is simply a commodity, and they recognize, and there's a talent in recognizing that their audiences, who will pay a lot of money, and give them a lot of attention, will hear what they want to hear. They'll hear what they want the truth to be, more so than what the truth is. You know, so in a way, like, there are days I'll be totally candid. Like, and this is more of a confession. I wish I had that talent to, like, can I curse on here? To, like, not give a shit. Not give a shit what the truth is, but just be able to sell it. I'd be sitting in a much nicer house than I am in right now. But I don't have that talent, if you want to call it that.
Yeah. I don't think I have that talent. I'm not sure I want to have that talent. More like to just make it dispensable. Like, for some, there's like some weird default mechanism for me. I mean, it's not weird, but like, just I can't see it. I can't like just go, well, this isn't true, but let's run with it.
Yeah,
Like I just don't operate that way. It's just not, it feels just so weird. Like, and I don't know, like, how does that start working in someone? Is it something they've always had, or did they just kind of like turn to the side, to the dark side, and they were like, well, this is making me a lot of money, like,
well, like a lot of things, I think for most people in that situation, it's either this psychosis in a way,
yeah,
and there's something broken at a heart level, a soul level, a
yeah.
mind level. But for most people, I was going to say it happens gradually and then it happens suddenly.
Mm.
It's kind of like the Great Depression. There were all kinds of factors, or the Great Recession here, more in
Yeah,
more recent
yeah.
history. There are all kinds of signs we could have taken and seen that this thing was happening. But it happened gradually over the course of 2007, 2008, and then it happened suddenly. Big, huge institution, multi-billion, 100 billion, $1 trillion organization tumbles. And I think for our consciences, for our souls, I don't think someone turns to the dark side right away. I think it's something that happens gradually, where you give yourself permission to fudge the truth just a
Mm.
little bit, but you fudge the truth. Why? Like, listen, I go to church with people that are really, I believe they're good people with good intentions. And for the most part, they have a clear discernment of what's right and what's wrong. But they follow certain politicians or will hop online with certain campaigns because they think this is war. They see things through the lens of, this is a war. We've identified who the enemy is, and we are willing to sign on to all kinds of shenanigans because we have to fight them. We have to fight the enemy. So in a war, all hands on deck, and
Yeah.
there are no rules in war. I'm oversimplifying now, but that's basically the mindset.
So how was I think this is a really interesting segue into this, to dive deeper into this intersection between politics and faith, and how this has become such a lightning rod of an
Yeah,
issue, and how I think you and I talked kind of offline about this, how uh religious faith-based people are in many ways embracing things that feel antithetical to the teachings of Jesus and to general faith-based belief as it is. How has this been going? How have we kind of like melded into this weird circumstance we're in? Like,
well, this is not a new problem. I think that whether you folks believe in the Bible or believe in the Bible to certain degrees or not, it at the very least shares profound, stories that have been passed through the generations now for thousands of years. So we see this story repeated where, going back to say an incident a lot of folks know, the golden calf.
right.
They just heard those characters just heard the voice. And now I believe in it authoritatively, but I'm sharing it more from a literary standpoint.
Yeah.
Those characters just heard the very voice of God, like the creator, directly from that sound that they heard, and it was overwhelming. And their leader just went up the mountain to transcribe the law, what they were going to live by as a nation, as a people of God, right? And it wasn't even so 41 days. So that's what it's 6 weeks, not even 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
My wife, by the way, is at a training program right now that's 6.5 weeks long. It feels long to me because I miss her, but
Yeah.
listen, it's 6.5 weeks,
Right.
so they weren't even looking at 6.5 weeks, and yet they're like, forget it. He's not coming down. This whole thing's a farce. They just heard the voice of God, and they're doing this and building a golden calf. Now, the thing is, though, when we talk about idolatry, I think those folks who are Jews, Christians, or other types of religions that know idolatry is a bad thing, we often think in terms of the golden calf as this thing that's 180 degrees off of their worship practices. This looked so different. It was the exact opposite of worshiping God. That's not true. The idolatry that we need to be wary of is the idolatry that's 10 degrees off of our normal practices, 10 degrees off of godly worship, right? Of worshiping the true transcendent. We're not all of a sudden going to go from worshiping God, and I'm just using this now again. I happen to be a believer in Judeo-Christian. That's my background, but I'm using it more as an analogy in terms of moral posture. we're not going to go from worshiping God to worshiping the devil. No,
Right.
the devil is crafty. The devil will make himself, he knows the language of God by heart. He quotes to, Eve
Right.
in Genesis 3, the very scripture from God, God's words itself. So I think the kind of idolatry that we have to be wary of is the idolatry that looks a lot like what we're used to worshiping, right? So I think a lot of folks have used politics as their religion, that feeling they get from going to church, that feeling they get from going to synagogue, from going to temple, from going to their spiritual gatherings. That's the feeling they get from going to something like a MAGA convention. That sense of community, that sense of belonging, that sense of meaning, that he's fighting for us. So
yeah. What's interesting, some new information came out. This will come out Thursday, by the way. So this is going to be very on topic.
Okay.
I think with all this, but there's a lot of information, new, I don't want to say evidence, just polling, and whatever you think about polling, hey, it's varied. The whole thing, it's a sample, but that this movement is waning very hard right now. Now, what you may see will tell you that's not true, but when we start looking at the data, it's saying that this is a ship that's sinking for that. Now, how will this, it's interesting, how long does someone believe in something until it no longer serves them in a way that will keep fueling this desire? And it feels like while there is something, is it a case of the minority having the megaphone on something like this, or is this a real pervasive thing that we're experiencing?
Well, I think that goes to your point earlier about, some of the factors that are exacerbating this problem.
Yeah.
The media that we see isn't, there's not enough good stories out there, right? There's not enough stories of, oh, this is encouraging and this is the way things should be going.
Yeah.
It's a story because it's out of the ordinary. Yeah. So naturally, all different types of media figures, journalists from the independent media ecosystem, as well as big broadcast outlets, they're going to look for stories, for Fruit Loops that are, sound nutty, and that's what we're going to see on our favorite news shows.
Yeah.
From all different perspectives. I'm making fun of the red hat wearing folks, a little bit, but it's from all different stripes. So that's what many of us are going to see on our news programs, not those who are out in front of my Walmart registering people to vote or getting signatures for a ballot measure that they want to see happen. That is mundane, but I think it's incumbent on those of us who are engaged to recognize what Heschel said, a mid-20th century Jewish theologian. He said, sanctity is in the mundane. Sanctity is in the mundane. When we can, and I think a lot of folks who are spiritual, not just, from my Judeo-Christian background, from my friends who study Eastern practices, what is the path to sanity? What is the path to enlightenment? It's just breathing. You know what I mean? Like if you do meditation, it's such a revelation to me that like my brain is literally getting rewired. Like neuroplasticity happens because I'm doing this meditation thing. Now, for the folks who don't meditate, it's not some mystical thing. It's literally just breathing.
Yes.
So sanctity is in the very, what can be more mundane than that?
Yeah. Well, I think, and also we've also kind of constructed society and where that is not considered something that's amazing. Like it has to be something amazing. It's kind of this social intoxication.
Yeah.
It's like everything is a dance. It's an outrageous story. It's something that is a striving towards this incredible life that is so over the top and not boring, or not even boring, just like it's just not regular.
But
there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. And we almost don't see the extraordinary because we see it all the time. Right. But that's a talent. That's a whole other talent that I would like to continue to tap into, which is the everyday, seeing the extraordinary in the everyday. This is not to be taken for granted. Heschel went on further to say that every moment is another act of creation. Like the next moment is not guaranteed. We could all blow up. It could all be done. You know, I believe the Big Bang makes a ton of sense. You know, the Big Bang could have a Big Bang part 2, and we could all implode in on ourselves. So every moment is another act of creation because the next moment is not guaranteed. So for me, I think it is extraordinary. You know, just to expound on something a little bit more, it is extraordinary that I was diagnosed 16 years ago, 2007. Yeah, so 16 years ago, I was diagnosed as bipolar, and I came to understand it as sort of there's some wiring in my brain that, and I'm oversimplifying, that is a little amiss, and it causes, and that my brain chemistry and my neurochemistry is a little off. It's not what would be keeps me in what we might call normal ranges. And I've been trying for 16 years now to mitigate that. I tried pharmaceuticals at one point and wasn't deriving the benefits that I needed to. So I kind of weaned off of those. I've tried all different kinds of other practices, writing and just all different kinds of things. And last year, for the first time, I finally started meditating, literally even just 3-minute guided meditations. And for the first time, I experienced the very benefits that my psychiatrist and psychologist both were telling me I was supposed to be deriving from medication.
Yeah.
To me, that is extraordinary. From sitting down and breathing for 3 minutes at a time, figuring out how to, note my thoughts, because I have like squirrel brain, thoughts are constantly entering in, and finding certain practices so I could sit still for, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, sometimes 10, 15, and even 20 minutes now. To me, that is extraordinary. That my brain is literally getting rewired. My chemistry is literally, like, concretely being it's getting mixed up in all the best ways,
Yeah.
So as someone who is diagnosed as bipolar, now to experience the benefits of that and having more normal ranges and more normative responses, to me, that's extraordinary. From what? Sitting down and breathing for 3 minutes.
I know, right? Well, and I think that's also kind of indicative of, you talk about rewiring of the brain, and we're seeing that this is happening in all different aspects of our lives, the rewiring of our brain, some for more positive, much like you're saying, and then some for kind of this negative rewiring of the brain that is causing people to not have critical thinking skills.
Right. Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. There's the negative neuroplasticity as well, undesirable ways. There's a movie with Michael Douglas. I forget the name of it, but it's basically he gets in a traffic jam in LA traffic, and then he goes crazy. He goes nuts. And then at the end of the movie, I don't remember the exact line he says, but he's looking at these police at the edge of a pier. He's standing and he's like, wait, I'm the one who's crazy? How did I get here?
How did I get here?
Yeah. So
it's wild.
But sometimes if we can just disrupt that, if we can recognize it in ourselves or our loved ones and say, you need to take a beat.
Yeah. And that's what's difficult when going back to the beginning of this is how do you take that beat when someone, you talked about Denver Riggleman, says, you're no longer, you're dead to me.
Yeah.
Like you're no longer, how do you heal that situation when it feels so like cut and dry?
Yeah.
With that.
Well, so I do have an answer for that, but it might not be satisfactory for some folks. So number one is identifying those who it's not going to work for everybody. I don't have an infinite bandwidth. There are folks that I am friendly with, but maybe not friends with, that I get to a point where I say, this is causing more harm and I cannot do good in this situation. So I need to just I need to say, all right, I'm calling it a day, at least for now, for this season, because we're clearly not having productive conversations.
Yeah.
That said, there's a circle of people where I will not give up on these people in my life. I will not give up on our relationship. So though in those situations, there are some folks where we're so far apart and we continue to upset each other. But back in the day, it happened with my dad back in 2000. And for about 3.5, 4 years, we had such a fraught relationship. It was over religion. because I grew up in an observant Jewish household. We went to an Orthodox synagogue, and then I became a Christian when I was 29. Very fraught. But one conclusion he arrived at before I did was we don't want to give up on the relationship. He was initially thinking about sitting Shiva for me, which is the ritual Jewish people go through when somebody in their immediate family dies. But he stopped just short of that, and we continued to have dialogue, and we frustrated each other, made each other upset, angry, all
Yeah.
kinds of stuff for 3.5 years. But we kept, live to fight another day, and live to love another day. Eventually, was what came to fruition. Is we live to fight another day, but then we live to love another day. And what I saw, and one of the things I learned was that I can't convince somebody, kind of like the idolatry thing, got to recognize the degrees. I
Yeah.
can't convince somebody even on a single position to make 180 degree. I'm just not that compelling. I can't make that compelling of an argument. And frankly, I don't think anybody can, but I can make 1 degree. I have 1 degree of persuasion in a conversation. I think if I'm standing on the truth, if I'm standing on firm ground and I'm coming in love, I think that I can have 1 degree of persuasion. But the caveat to that is I have to be willing to be persuadable. Because
Mm.
if my intent is really to pursue the truth and to nurture a relationship, then I have to be willing to be persuadable. So there's just a lot of caveats, and at the end of the day, we'll arrive at it together. If we're coming in goodwill and good faith, I think that we can arrive at it together. Just stay in the relationship. Identify
Yeah.
relationships that are doing more harm than good. Because we're human beings. None of us have infinite capacity. So there are some folks where it's just like, you know what, we're better off just like finding different crowds to hang with,
Right.
and that's
Right.
fine. That's somebody else will work on that person. I
Yeah.
because I can't do it, but I have the capacity for about, I don't know whether it's 6 relationships, 12 relationships, 112 relationships. I do have a certain capacity, and I'm going to live to fight another day, and then I'm going to live to love another day. So
Yeah.
that's kind of my approach to it.
Well, it's an interesting approach too, and I think what's sometimes hard is if it's a family member or someone you're close to, and what if you reached a decision that this I just can't be in it with this person.
Yeah.
I think it's one thing if it's maybe friends or something, but when someone who raised you or something, and it feels like the end of something, it really does.
Yeah. And, if you're meant to come back together, it'll happen.
Yeah.
Like in former Congressman Riggleman's story, it was over a year that he wasn't able to even talk to his mom. But then there was a death in the family, and they came back together by circumstance. And the strength of that relationship, that bond that they had, living
Yeah.
that life that they lived together,
Yeah.
they had been through a lot together. That pervades, that transcends some rhetorical argument.
Yeah.
That can penetrate some of the illusion that led to their severance.
Yeah, most
So
definitely. Yeah, no, and I like to think about it that way when about my own life and talking to other people, like, what are the other factors in this that are not just this one singular issue? This should not be the death knell of us.
yeah,
We've experienced so many good things, this, and then think about it like of taking this one issue and then really look at it as like, actually, maybe the person who you look up to telling you this doesn't even care about it themselves. They pulled you into it. Just
right.
so it's like look at it's like, man, that's the duping. You actually may be getting duped here.
That's
Like,
right.
don't worry
That's
about
a
let's
that,
worry about us, our relationship.
That's a really good point, because I've recognized often times when I got reeled into a conversation because the person's agenda that I was conversing with,
Yeah.
their agenda wasn't to find some higher truth. Their agenda was a contentious one. They wanted to pull me into a contest, a rhetorical contest, but a
Yeah.
contest nonetheless, so that they could feel like they won some rhetorical contest, or maybe they were under the illusion that others were watching this contest and they could pound their chest when they beat me at this imaginary thing. And and I try to recognize when somebody isn't coming in goodwill and good faith,
Mm.
when they're not really moored by the truth. I try to recognize that and avoid those conversations, or maybe just check that person. Like if I know them in a different context,
Yeah.
And I know like, hey, this is a good guy. I can hang out with him, have a beer with him, or whatever. And now all of a sudden they're kind of spewing Hannity's talking points or something like
Yeah.
that. Like, hey, dude, I listened to the first 7 minutes of his show on POTUS today too. Like, it's all good. Okay, I can repeat it back to you. Can we talk now? Can we like have a human conversation now? You know?
What are the
So
signs you think of someone coming that way? I think this is really important because I think often sometimes people don't often recognize what they may be getting into with someone, or they're not cognizant of it. So in your mind, what are the signs of someone who's not coming in goodwill? Like you kind of like, all right, I'm recognizing for what this is as we're going through it.
it usually takes me a little bit of time because sometimes I'm dense, and honestly, I do have admittedly sometimes narcissistic tendencies as well as tendencies to project. I think that a lot of folks think the way that I do, so I get locked into these proclivities, if you will,
Mm.
the proclivities of thinking like a. Not, narcissism is a complex thing, but like
Mm-hmm.
always thinking that I'm right. Well, of course I'm right, and if I'm right, of course you'll agree with me. But then also the projection of, well, I think this way. Naturally, everyone should think this way,
Yeah.
right? Or feel this way, or believe this way. So once I recognize that in myself, I come with a little bit of a clearer vision. Not that I'm able to shed it completely, but I come with a little bit of a clearer vision to recognize, oh, I see. We're like 30 comments into this dialogue on Facebook or Twitter or whatever. And this dude hasn't even, or whoever it is, hasn't even once intimated something along the lines of, oh, that's interesting. I didn't think of it that way.
Mm.
Or even like a first cousin, twice removed, dog sitters, second cousin of version of that. Like if there's no possibility, if we're 30 comments in and there's no possibility that either one of us are like, huh, that's interesting. Let me think
Mm.
about that. And there's no version of that that's happened. What are we doing here?
Yeah.
Or if I say something in direct response to this person is asking me, and I assume they're asking in good faith and they really want my thoughts on something, and I share that, and their response isn't in response to what I just provided them, which was, in response to what they were asking directly of me, then I know they're just sort of kind of throwing arrows. They're taking different rhetorical
Yeah.
arrows out of a quiver and just shooting darts, shooting arrows. So I try to recognize that, but I also hold out hope that moment. Monica Guzman is great. She has this great book, and that's what it's called. I never thought of it that way. So she
Mm.
calls them intuit moments, for INTOIT. I never thought of it that way. She's a great journalist, and she's done experiments on this with an organization that she's a part of. And I just I hold out hope that there is going to be some moment like that. And maybe somebody can influence me. Like my son didn't get the vaccine, and that was a big deal. And I didn't understand it. I disagreed with it. I went about it in all kinds of the wrong ways. But then eventually he let me in. And he let me into the conversation. He let me into his thinking. He let me into why he dug his heels in at a certain point. It was
Yeah.
partly, admittedly, my fault. But at the very least, eventually I came to understand it a little bit better. And I never thought of it from his perspective. I still disagree with it, but at least we came to a mutual understanding. And he came to understand certain boundaries that other folks in his life had. Like at the very least, at a certain point when the pandemic was still, killing people, rocking and rolling,
Yeah.
we were in the thick of it. He, at the very least, would get tested before a family gathering, for example, before he entered into that. He'd respect, mask wearing in certain circumstances. So he didn't get the vaccine, but that's cool. Like we understood each other a little bit better, and we had, we had a certain amount of persuasion over each other. So, we could still disagree on certain things, but I don't know, that to me, at the very least, recognizing we got to a point where we weren't getting anywhere, but where
Yeah.
can we get to that place where we can say, huh, that's interesting. I didn't think of it from your perspective. I never thought of it that way.
I love that. And it has made me think about where do we have to get to that point in politics? Where is it? I haven't thought about it that way. And also there's been new data about that 40% of Americans now consider themselves to be independent. Whatever
Yeah.
version of that is, it's pretty new.
Yeah.
What does that say about our nation? And two, is that kind of the I didn't think about it, moving
Yeah.
towards I didn't think about it, that type of thing?
Well, there are some things where I think we have to compete. The independents, I've heard 40 to 42% as
Yeah.
well. I think that and I'm referring now to independents, we have to compete on the same planes as the extremists. There are some things that I'm simply not willing to fight with the language of some extremists. I'm not willing to engage in violent protest, for example.
Yeah.
But I think there's a place for nonviolent resistance. When it comes to politics, I think that if organizations like the Forward Party, which is Miles Taylor, former Governor Christine Whitman, she was EPA administrator, and Andrew Yang. Yeah. If they are able to compete at the state and local levels, or perhaps at U.S. House level districts, if they can raise enough money to really compete in several of those districts, then it just requires money. I know in my district of California 27, the reason that Representative Mike Garcia is only playing to the most extreme wings of the Republican Party, despite the fact that this is one of the purplest districts in the country, is because that's where he gets his money from. So if somebody is a well-funded candidate and they're getting money from independent groups or moderate groups or centrist groups or groups that their caveat to them giving to a campaign is, well, you have to join the Problem Solvers Caucus. So that's fighting on that plane, right? It's also media. There's incentives. So it's not just money, it's media appearances and access. So Mike Garcia appeals to that audience because the media appearances that he's making are on Fox Business or Fox News or on OANN. And there's a certain audience, a certain constituency that's watching him on those platforms. But if he can also appeal to audiences that, say, are reading the Dispatch or listening to the Dispatch's podcasts, or on the Bulwark and listening to the Bulwark's podcasts, those are more moderate audiences. The audience there have nuanced positions, nuanced opinions on a lot of different positions. So I think as independent media outlets like that grow, the Dispatch in particular, or Politicology is one of my favorite platforms, as they continue to grow, then it will have more influence more broadly. So it's a money thing, it's a media thing, it's a civic engagement thing, and frankly, at the end of the day, it all comes down to individual citizens, individual engaged citizens, and our own behavior, our own choices. So, yeah, there's no one big sweeping solution. I think it's a lot of little things, a lot of individual choices.
Yeah, no, it sounds like, I mean, that certainly is more logical, the approach to that it's going to be a multifactorial situation to break through. I wonder, like, because right now it's so much, a lot of things are done based off of which party you're a part of or what side of the aisle. How does that get broken up so that this is not such the dominant landscape? And maybe it's just because there's so much money tied into these things and constituencies, but it's like, how does this get broken up so that it feels more like, because I always hear people say, well, I'm just going to choose this side. It's like it's this binary decision all the time. It's like, how do we get past this binary decision making where people feel like they have to be on this side? Or is it just part of our tribalism as people?
Some of it is pretty set. I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with a fellow named Pete Dominic, and I like the guy. I respect the guy. He's definitely left, not just left of center, but pretty far left. And he has a lot of really, really intelligent guests on his show. Around the election, I shared something, and I said, I don't understand how friends of mine can't even fathom the possibility of voting for somebody from the other party if they affiliate with one party, one major party or the other. Oh man, he was all over me, and he retweeted it on his the comment on his platform, and so his 40,000, 50,000 followers were all just like banging away at me. It was intimidating and suffocating but Pete ended up, he and I kept in touch. He ended up coming on my program. We still really disagreed about it. He said flat out, no, that triggers me. We're just beyond the point of ever considering the possibility of voting for a Republican. What occurred to me is that a lot of things occurred to me. One is he wasn't really giving space to the possibility that there's somebody who still identifies as a Republican that could be some other flavor of it
Yeah,
that isn't Trumpian or isn't,
sure.
Matt Gatesian or Marjorie Taylor Greene. Like there are others who still identify as Republican who are, conservatives based on their principled conservatives,
Yeah.
that they read Burke in college and were persuaded by, by that philosopher's content, by, or maybe they watched the evolution of William F. Buckley in more recent
Yeah.
history, and they were persuaded by his debates with very erudite liberals. That's more my formation is, when we think of liberal, old school liberal,
Right. Right. Yeah.
or libertarian. So I think that, okay, so here's the thing. I think that it is something that can be broken up more relationally than transactionally.
Hmm.
And we've been talking about it already here in a couple of ways. But I think that, again, I don't think I made a ton of headway with Pete Dominic in that instance. But the fact is, he came back for another conversation. The fact is, he responded to my follow-up email. Hey, man, thanks. It was nice to see you. I'm sure we made each other upset about a couple of different things, and he responded, hey, thanks for staying in the conversation. So again, it goes back to that idea of like 1 degree,
Yes.
And he caused me to think about a couple of things. Like, do I want to identify as a small business conservative going forward? Because that clearly has a different resonance with a number of people. They immediately think of, certain things that doesn't align with my philosophy of how I approach business, how I engage with my community, and that sort of thing. So he made me think about a few things. But what I mean by relationally versus transactionally is, again, if I want to win a contest, I'm going to be frustrated again and again and again. I'm not going to get very far. But if I'm committed to that relationship, I think that we can stay in this thing together. We can stay in this American experiment together. We can stay in being neighbors with each other a little bit longer. We can stay, again, live to fight another day, live to live, love another day.
Yeah. It's funny. I've had that conversation with people too about voting for a certain side and stuff. And same thing. I would never do this. I said, well, it sounds like a lack of understanding the spectrum of possibilities for that. And so I would, I always give examples of like, I mean, if think about it, if you're very hardcore into this, and this is a very large thing, I said, but there are many scientists, cosmologists who think, life must be teeming in the universe. There must be alien civilizations all over the place, but we'll never consider that on the spectrum of possibilities that Earth may be the only place that has life. All these things are just possibilities on a spectrum that could exist. They could. Yeah. I'm not saying they are. They do. Yeah. But you have to, like, in your mind, think these are possibilities. It's just like thinking in your life, there's a possibility I could walk out the door and not be alive. And there's a possibility I could live for 50 more years. Where that all of these things are possibilities. I'm not saying they're going to happen, but to close yourself off to the possibilities of the spectrum, then I think that's a dangerous place, because then you're just saying, like, and I've used this a lot too. It's like, if you love going out on the ocean and boating and you believe nothing bad will ever happen, you will not be prepared when something bad happens, because it's a possibility. It's like, a possibility. It's always a possibility. It's like
I used to ride motorcycles, and I had this great Harley that I really tricked out. And what made me a good motorcycle rider is I was always just a little bit afraid.
Right.
Not afraid to the point of being paralyzed, but like just a little bit afraid, so that I needed to be looking out and alert at all times, and not it takes what you're describing. It takes a lack of imagination,
Yes. Yes.
We want to be able to at least imagine the possibilities. And some great work is always done when you don't recognize the process. Like, I don't know, did you watch I think it was either on Apple or Disney Plus, the Beatles' last album that they made?
No, I didn't watch that. No.
What's his name? Peter Jackson had like hundreds of hours of footage, and he curated it into, I forget how long it was, but it was about a dozen hours altogether.
Okay.
And what you're watching is the dialogue between the four members of the Beatles and other people in the room, and especially a lot of the creative process unfolding, especially between Paul and John. And to us, if we just took a snippet of that, again, it would just look mundane. Like, what is he doing?
Yeah.
And he's just kind of taking some random words like, uh, you know, like, let's do this city instead of that city because it has the right number of syllables in it,
Yeah.
you know? And it's the documentary, I think, was called Get Back.
Mm.
Um, so it just, we don't recognize it. You know, a great musician, a virtuoso musician,
Yeah.
a lot of their virtuosity is simply playing scales, you know, or great painters, Picasso and George
Yeah.
Braque, they would talk about their brushes. You know?
Yeah.
Like, we think these profound things and they're talking about their brushes, you know?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think to there's a lot of themes that seem to be coming up a few times in this conversation, but it's recognizing the sanctity in the mundane, like
Yeah.
recognizing the extraordinary in the ordinary, you know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's interesting. It's just you get in these conversations and you start thinking, and you just kind of have like a hard no, like immediately.
yeah,
I always think there's something there. There's something there that I need to figure out like, I need to like not be like, what do you think? It is more of like, just ask questions and come in a very kind way. And it's like, well, I'm just interested in your philosophy behind this
yeah,
or that. Cause I did this with somebody that I know, cause they were like hardcore Democrat, super left, they hate Donald Trump big time. And they're like, I said, well, this is just a thought experiment. Uh, you know, would you vote for someone in the Democratic Party that literally embodied everything Donald Trump embodied? And they paused. I don't think they ever were put this before. And they said, I probably wouldn't do it then. And I was like, so
yeah,
there is a possibility then.
yeah.
There's always a possibility. It's like,
No,
you
I
know,
have friends that were lifelong Republicans. I have friends that, you know, they started in politics in the Reagan administration, were in George H.W. Bush
yeah,
administration, were major speechwriters for Bush too, and they are no longer Republicans, and they
right.
have voted now for Democrats
Yeah,
because I'm sure when they were in the Reagan administration, 20 nothing years old, just getting started in that world, they could never imagine the possibility of voting for a
of
Democrat.
course.
But they couldn't imagine the possibility of Donald Trump becoming president,
Right.
taking over the Republican Party.
You couldn't
You know?
imagine. Just like when I was 20, I couldn't imagine I'd be writing and talking to a bunch of people experiencing psychedelics. It would literally blow my mind when I was 20. It's a the thing about, of course, you don't know. Even in the course of your lifetime, you experience many lifetimes
Yeah,
of thoughts and ideas and how you see the world. So to me, the possibility part is always there.
yeah,
Or that, just what's the season we're in?
yeah. That's
And
right.
that possibility.
Yeah, imagination is funny.
Right. And
um,
I feel
yeah,
like we're in that season kind of, and I want to turn it back to this kind of the last part, with religion. I've interviewed so many different people, and different aspects of religion. There's a big deconstruction movement of religion happening right now. And there's lots of data talking about, especially young people's relationship with religion. I would love for you to talk about that movement or what you're seeing, at least yourself out there.
yeah. I was at a seminar slash retreat this last weekend, and someone who's very knowledgeable, went to divinity school, is a pastor, and part of what he was saying was, you know, I'm really pissed off at Constantine.
Mm.
And I've heard that refrain before. I actually heard it from my father, who Constantine was this one of the last emperors
Mm-hmm.
before the fall of Rome. And what he did was he made Christianity the state religion of Rome, right? And all of a sudden, this band of followers of this rabbi, this first century, they didn't think of it as first century, but you know what I'm talking about,
Yeah.
named Jesus or Yeshua ben Yosef. It was a scraggly bunch of, you know, theological rebels. They went to a position of power, and that's been the history of Christianity for the last 1700 years or so. And my father, actually, who's still an Orthodox Jew, he came to a very similar conclusion. because over the years, we gave each other stuff to read, stuff to consider. And he came to a conclusion after reading, in particular, a historian named N.T. Wright, Tom Wright, who writes, his specialty is first century Israel, first century Palestine, that area, and the character of Jesus and who he probably was historically. And my dad came to this conclusion that Yeshua ben Yosef, the guy we know as Jesus Christ, Jesus the Messiah, he came to the conclusion that that person, number one, lived. Number two, was what Jews would consider a tzaddik, like the great rabbi of his generation. Also a prophet in the tradition of Malachi, Isaiah, Jeremiah. But he says, and he was a Messiah candidate, as we would think of it, but he was a failed Messiah candidate. And then as we revisited that conversation a few times the next year, he goes, I still think he was a Messiah candidate, but I think, or a failed Messiah candidate, but I don't think the failure was his. The failure was the failure of the people of Israel of his generation. It's a very, very nuanced understanding of who Jesus was. But he goes, my father's inimitable. Well, I guess I'm going to try to imitate him. So imitable way. He goes, but I'm really pissed off at Constantine. Constantine stole Jesus from the Jews.
I love that impression, by the way.
Yeah. So I think that what we're seeing now in terms of deconstruction is we're starting to try to either peel away or completely deconstruct where the institutional church has gone more the way of Constantine and less the way of Christ. And I welcome that.
Me too.
As soon as I became a Christian, I became a Christian because Rabbi Jesus, I found more compelling than any Devar Torah when he was giving the Sermon on the Mount, more compelling than any Devar Torah I'd ever read, any explanation on the Torah that I had ever read. I came to it based on theological convictions. When I walked into a church, I realized the community of the church was more primarily defined by social and political convictions than theological ones. So when push comes to shove, and I see that what Jesus was talking about in terms of strangers and orphans and widows, what Jesus was talking about, what we would a term we might use contemporary today, marginalized people. Our friends from church, their a priori position, or their disposition, if you will, their preferences, would be more averse to what Jesus was saying. I'm always willing to stay in the conversation if they say they're Christians and they're followers of Jesus, and then we come across some scripture that's at odds with their political or social preferences. Hey, man, let's read some scripture. Let's see what it says. You want to kick me out of the Bible study? That's cool. I still got scripture, you know? And that's happened more than one occasion. I welcome that deconstruction, because then folks are going to have to choose. Well, do I really believe in Jesus of scripture? Do I really believe in what these gospel accounts are saying? Or do I prefer what Donald Trump is saying? Because the two are very much at odds. I could turn to virtually any page of the Bible and it testifies against the words, actions, and character of Donald Trump. And that might piss some people off, but it is what it is.
It is what it is.
And if you want to talk about it, let's open up our Bible. Let's figure it out.
It's exactly right. It's exactly right. There's actually, I forgot what I was doing, but I was reading about, I think it's a book. Maybe it's kind of a sci-fi book, but it's basically the premise is that Jesus returns, but humanity rejects Jesus. Because Jesus is actually teaching the things. He's like about the things that we literally just talked about, marginalized communities, love, and society is like, I don't know. Is this going to make us money? They jail Jesus because he's doing good things for underserved people. And I often think, would that be the reality? Let's talk about conceptual thinking, right? Would that be the reality? More than likely, yes. It would not be believed to be the person he was. It would be jailed. And even all these good things were not, if they weren't making money or they weren't sensationalized, it'd be like, who is this nut job? It'd be like, you wouldn't even recognize the Messiah.
No. And it's not a new story. If you look at the disciples, the people who were walking with him at the time that he was walking the earth, they're like, all right, Jesus, all right, Rabbi, when are we going to kick some ass? We got to win this thing. We got to redeem.
Warriors,
we got to do this tikkun olam thing. And he's like, well, I'm going to go to the cross and I'm going to die.
Yep.
You know, in order to live, you have to die.
Right.
And they're like, okay, so you're going to die. You're going to raise again. And then you're going to kick some ass. He's like, no, that's not,
No.
I'm going to send the Holy Spirit. You know,
Yeah.
like they were like, okay, so when do we kick some
That's
ass?
exactly
When do we get the
right.
throne? And I want to sit on the right side of your throne. And like, they're thinking of power and glory
That's
and,
right.
you know, riches. And he's like, no. And his path to victory was through the cross.
That's
and we
right.
still don't recognize it.
No.
It was an upside down victory.
It's an
So,
upside down victory. And I think it's fathom for it's hard for people to fathom that, because, and I think that's what it's turned into for a lot of the extremist aspect, is like, this is the warrior Jesus. This is, you know, what Kristen Kobes wrote about. It's this
yeah.
John Wayne Jesus. It's
Yeah.
this crazy, like, we're gonna kick ass, man. Like, Jesus
Yeah.
gonna kick some monkey asses out here and stuff. It's like, wait, this has nothing to do with this. Like, what are you
Right.
talking about? Like,
Yeah.
have you even looked at the Bible?
Yeah. Yeah. Jesus, like, all right. So I have this friend who is trans, queer, Latinx person, ethicist, theologian,
Yeah.
and had him on my show. And some of my some commenters, when we posted the episode, they were giving him all kinds of crap, whether it's about the Latinx thing or about the trans thing. And his response is always like, hey, let's go get some supper. Let's go get a beer.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, no, I want to fight with you. He's like, no, that's kind of what Jesus said. He
Exactly.
like, people are coming, hey, let's break some bread. Like, literally, like, let's break some bread. Let's fill some of these baskets with some fish, and we can hang out and talk and eat.
Yep.
And that's, you know, that was Jesus's way. So
yeah, I mean, he showed up to the party and filled the wine, you know, a deal up, man. He was like, all right. Like,
yeah, yeah. And that guy, we shared another episode from another show that I'm involved with, of this guy, Daryl Davis, great musician.
Oh yeah.
You know who Daryl Davis is?
I know who Daryl Davis is. Yeah.
The way he describes this, I don't know if this was on
Man.
our recording, but the way he described the story was one of the first times a guy from the KKK approached him. He was, hey man, let's get a beer.
That's
and
right.
KKK dude's like, don't you know who the hell I am? He's like, yeah, let's go get a beer.
That's right. And he breaks them down, and they couldn't believe anymore over time, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So that's the way I'm going to follow, you know, and every once in a while I might get punched in the throat, but that's all right. I'll take it, if you know, but more often than not, we'll get to have that beer, that coffee or whatever. And
that's right. That's literally, I feel like, what Jesus wants. Let's just sit down at the table. Let's chat. Let's, and because most people come at it from a very offensive or defensive position with people.
Yeah.
And Jesus didn't do that.
No.
And that's why, like, when I see different things, this crazy warrior stuff, I'm like, okay, I'm not, what happened? Like, this is so far from actually what happened. Like, so let's discuss this. Like, who told you this shit, man? I just want to know. Like, it's like if somebody tells you about the Bill of Rights, the Constitution's like the hotbed thing, right? Constitution, Bill of Rights, and then you learn they actually never read it.
That's right.
This shit. Like, how do you, what?
Yeah. And it happens, like, just start, like, and again, like, if scripture's not your thing, all right, let's read the Constitution. Let's read the Bill of Rights. Because a lot of folks who are like, separate the church and state, you know where it comes from? The First Amendment, you know, the Establishment Clause in the same place, free expression. And like, it's all in, like, that tension is supposed to happen, you know? It's not the absence of church and state. Like, it's just, let's embrace the nuance, you know?
Let's embrace the nuance. And man, I appreciate the nuance, Corey, so much. I've taken up a lot of your time. I really appreciate it. But how can everyone get more Corey in their life? How about that?
I don't know. My wife would be like, I've had enough. No,
okay. Well, she's out of town, isn't she?
Yeah, she's out of town. Oh, but you know what? She was so happy to see me when I went to visit. It was really nice. It was very endearing. We felt like we were dating all over again. It was awesome.
Beautiful.
So easiest way to find me, I'm on all the socials at Corey S. Nathan. And that's with Corey with an E, S as in Sam. So at Corey S. Nathan like the hot dogs. And then you can find my my program, Talk Politics and Religion without killing each other. Easiest way is the website, politicsandreligion.us, www.politicsandreligion.us.
Beautiful, man. I can't wait to release this. This is going to be awesome, man.
I really appreciate you having me on, Darian. It was great hanging out with you, man. We should hang out in person. We should grab that beer.
I know. I'm all about it. Believe me. I'm definitely all about it. And I'm just grateful, honestly, just grateful. I feel like I'm always learning because I'm always talking to different people, and it's just a pleasure to speak with someone like yourself. So
that's awesome. My pleasure. Absolutely.